Good morning. So we'll start my introduction to the ecological state, functioning and management of big lakes of the Aquitaine coast. We will share this presentation among three people. Then a responsible of the Communauté des communes des Grands Lacs will introduce the second part. Then I'll take the floor again for the third part. I'll deal with macrophytes. And Franck Hennaut from the Sage Médocain will conclude the presentation. So the point here is to introduce the speech, and then Laurent will speak about the water level management. Then we'll speak about water plants of the coast, macrophytes, and Franck will tell you more about quality management, water, and the situation between the forest and the lake. I could sing a song, but it's not the point here today. I think we're waiting for the slides. And sorry, but I've forgotten the fourth member of the team in charge of lake study in Garonne, but he doesn't have to take the floor. But you can also speak with him if you've got questions or comments. Ecological status, functioning and management of Aquitaine Great Lakes. So we're going to Bordeaux and along the Atlantic coast between the Gironde estuary and the Dour estuary. You can find 15 lakes, natural ones, that were created by the development of dunes along the coast, the natural development of dunes. 4 of them are a bit different because they're bigger. The north of the Arcachon, Arcachon Bay, the Lacanau Lake. Franck is a specialist of this area. Laurent is specialist with the Cazaux-Sanguinet Lake and the parent is Biscarrosse Lake. The names come from the municipalities. The Carcan-Hortin Lake is quite big, 62 square kilometers, and the smallest is Lacanau Lake, 20 square kilometers. Shallow lakes, maximum 20 meters for the Cazaux Lake, but generally less than 10 meters. Great lakes in Aquitaine. Those lakes come from the separation with the Atlantic Ocean by the dune. We can still find traces at the bottom of the lake, traces of former civilizations. Low altitude between 15 and 13 meters, variable trophic level. Quite sandy lake shores. The characteristic is that they come from the existence of dunes. So we've got a disymmetric west-east disymmetrical bathymetry. You've got 2 different profiles. On the east part of the lake's swamps, and the predominant winds come from the west. Human activities in the lakes, drinking water, in particular Caso Sanguine Lake, also places for boating and sailing, also hunting and fishing, maybe something like what happens here, other recreational activities. So much leisure activities. Also in the Parentis Biscarros lake you can find oil wells. And as I said it before, it's an area where you can find archaeological remains. Now, let's see the ecological status. Guillaume from the Water Agency provided us with these figures. So, Carcan Lake and Caso Sanguine Lake are reference lakes in Europe. With some nuances, we've got new indicators for Lacano and Parentis Biscarrosa lakes. Some biological indicators have nuanced the evaluation to moderate, but generally speaking, all the indicators are quite good. The main challenges regarding management and ecological issues, you've got to favor the tourist activities, also manage water level fluctuations, water quality, in particular linked with the issue of swimming activities and physical-chemical monitoring. Franck will conclude the presentation presenting natural habitats and biodiversity, in particular in the peripheral areas, wetlands, tributaries, ecological continuity. I'll take the floor again to speak about the rare endangered endemic fauna and flora. I'll also speak about exotic aquatic plants and the ecosystem functioning and temporal dynamics within the lakes. Now I'll give the floor to Laurent from the Association of Municipalities of the Great Lakes. My name is Laurent Picane. I'm in charge of the environment service of the Grand-Lieu community. I will speak in particular of a point after the management of water level that seems to be problematic after listening to the speeches of this morning. Since 2009, the serial, the Interlake Relay Information System, Lakes networking data system, a link between quantitative and qualitative management in lakes. It's a management scheme to manage the lake levels through the year with 5 managing works and some physical parameters: rainfall, water temperature and air temperature. First work equipped with zero system. It's an air army base. Caso Lake, second site, equipped with zero system with a current I mean, the actual water level, because the water of the lake is not horizontal, as one could expect. A third one, the Consanguiné Lake, with the Watergate boat. The fourth one, the Parties with Carras Lake. Fourth, Proverd and Tafar works. Small ones, 6-8 meters wide. 6-8 meter wide. And last work, regulatory work. The Orient Lake. This lake is managed by another community, and it has a regulatory power, although the lake itself is much smaller, 340 hectares. The serial system gives us this information regarding the water level, the water flow between works, and some physical parameters you may not see on the screen. It's a hydraulic coordination tool of the whole catchment area. My partner from Sage is not here today, unfortunately. This coordination tool allows improving the knowledge of the hydraulic functioning of whole lakes, change starting from the hydric budget networking. This is the synthesis of the data collected. In blue, you've got the inlet, and in orange, you've got outlet flows. And its hypothesis for 10 millimeters rain a day. And it shows that the dams per se don't have any regulatory power per se. A coordination tool that can help validating a new interdepartment water law. Gironde and Landes department with some characteristics. It has to be an open and network-focused communication information available for anyone, for upstream to downstream data networking between public managers and stakeholders within a hydraulic coordination committee, which is the Army, and two associations of municipalities, all of them being represented within the Hydraulic Coordination Committee in order to decide the objectives and what is at stake and the use of it. Water law with ecological issues as a priority. A minimum water flow for hydraulic infrastructures and fishways, which is mandatory by law. A moderated water flow during floods in order to keep a good morphodynamic state of outlet rivers. Management of seasonal water level fluctuations in order to conserve natural habitats for endemic and endangered species. We mainly speak about amphibians, isolated lawns, water law and hydraulic management, allowing a natural water level fluctuations, sometimes despite of recreational activities, in particular hunting, angling, swimming, and also motor boating. If you want to have more information, just come and talk to me. So I'll speak about aquatic macrophytes of Aquitaine Great Lakes. On the lake, we have detected more than 80 taxa within shallow waters and deeper zones, helophytes on the banks or macrophytes in the water. We can have the species you have on the screen. Given the acidity of waters, we find plants that like such environment, also that like sand. Unfortunately, the Lobelia dortmanna that disappeared from Grand-Lieu lake, and here where you've got the arrow, it's the last southern place where this plant is found in Europe. It likes oligotrophic environment, shallow water, with other species called isolated. It's a very well protected plant, and it is withdrawing given the acidification of lakes. Among these plants, you have protected and rare species. Litorella uniflora, maybe not that rare, but it has a very small ecological balance. It demands very specific conditions, in particular regarding suspended matters and the level of water. Is that boring? And a species that has an aquatic form, the Carapsis verticillata emondata. It was a quick view of the native plants. The Aquitaine lakes have host for 30 years exotic plants such as Lagariciphon major from South America and Algeria, both plants being problematic. Also, the ones you've seen at the bottom of the photography. You also have human activities, and the users ask for information about the way we manage these plants. We have to communicate, and it's not always easy. You see a mountain of Algeria harvested in the port of the municipality of Opportun. So from this information, I will give you more. I will tell more about scientific research applied to lake management. I speak in the name of a team. Could have added the photography of Alain Dutardre. You may know him. We follow up his works. He's now retired. Christina Ribodo works on the chemical aspect, and Mr. Gemino works on water plants, phytoplankton, diatomy. So we work on different scales, whole lake scale, particular regarding community plants, dynamic and bioindication. We work on the biotope scale, which is a bit more specific, community response to physical disturbances, distribution, assemblage, functional traits. And at a finer scale, effect of plants on benthic functioning. What is the distribution dynamic of macrophyte communities? We started working that way at the beginning of the 80s. We draft up easy maps, walking along the banks. For the Escherichia boreana, the red dots show high occurrence, and you see the evolution each time scarcer, so the trend is the disappearance of this plant. Whereas for the other one, the trend is opposite. So this is for the banks of the lakes. And when we go towards the center of the lake, we use eco sounding, where we can find plants, and also we try and collect samples, and we can draft up distribution maps. So regarding the dynamics, it is specific to each lake. Globally, isolated tend to be stable, no regression, but for a low occurrence of Ecological boreana. So it is a surviving species, and we hope we can keep it aboard for the coming year. Stable dynamics of Lagarosiphon major. For 10 years we have seen it is stable, and it tends to replace Lagarosiphon in some places. You'll see a list of questions, of issues we work on. In particular, first the impact of wind, of waves, and human activities, disturbances. So we try and draft up maps on exposure to wind. So the distances where winds blow with no obstacle, hence the possibility of creating waves. So it's a west-north-west exposure to wind. Also use other models taking into account bathymetry, so the probability of resuspension. The depth is less than half the wavelength of the wave. We use also the WFD Albert protocol. Where you've got red areas, you have an impact of human activities. To sum up the results, we expected a dichotomy east-west, but it's not that easy. We have to see the complexity of the shape of the banks. Some communities will be more in the east, others in the west, but if we refine the scale, it is not always easy to forecast the presence of this or that community, clear and specific assemblages, isoetids, etc. You can see that on the slide. Aquatic forms of small helophytes and salt grass. So the landscapes are quite varied and defined. Communities distribution. The main parameters are wind and wave exposure, the resuspension, swimming areas, and the modification of banks, in particular shoreline equipment, etc., playing a big part. We try to modelize the potential distribution and occurrence of specific aquatic plant communities, forecasting areas for weeds, spreading, control, conservation, restoration, isoetids. Also work on the role of reed bed. Quickly, we can speak about benthic fluxes of oxygen and carbon. We work in partnership with the University of Bordeaux, with Christina. We measure the fluxes on isoetids as well as on the bare sediment. So we set up benthic chambers during the day, during the night. And we've seen the role that it is important to keep them. When we see the methane fluxes at the sediment level, vegetated sediment level and bare sediment, we can see that on the bare sediment, the breathing processes release carbon linked with the bacteria activity on the bare sediment, whereas for the vegetated sediment, the green gas houses are kept, given the loss of oxygen at the root level, and it favors the methanotrophy. So generally, we can say that these plants tend to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases, maybe not at the lake scale, but it helps the oligotrophication of these elements, this gas that shouldn't be released in the nature.
As far as biochemistry is concerned, we are looking at invasive species as well, and we have some exotic macrophytes that generate macrophytes that are quite invasive. They create their own substrate, organic substrate, and what's important to know is that this degradation of organic matter is very keen on oxygen. So we have anoxic sediments. We can see that methane, carbon dioxide is emitted, and it's related to the degradation of the matter. It is related to this organic matter buildup that generates their own gas. Here on the graphs we can see the oxygen saturation. So we have the nitrogen total depending on the seasons, spring, summer and autumn. In blue we are at the surface level, and in green it's measures that are done punctually within the plants. So we can see that there are layers of oxygen in the microphytes. So we can see that we can have more oxygen than here, especially in summer. There are areas where we're close to zero in terms of oxygen saturation. As far as nitrogen is concerned, it is very seasonal. Nitrogen is used almost completely in summer, whereas in autumn it's emitted again, and so the plants are going to start emitting more nitrogen. We also have questions about movements of water. So what is the role of these movements of water in oxygens within the microphytes? So these large bushes of plants tend to move together with the water, so it could mean that there could be anoxias at the microphytes level. And so it's interesting to look at the impact of the wind. We talked about that this morning as well. So it has an impact on the water movement, that has an impact on oxygen. So we have oxygen probes, autonomous ones, that can be left for several days or months in the water. We've placed them in the plants, so that's the green part of the graphs, and outside of the plants, so in bare soil, it's what you can see behind in red. We placed these uptodes in sheltered areas and exposed areas, so sheltered from the wind and exposed to the wind. And we can see that there are anoxia periods in sheltered areas in August, September. So this is not a punctual testing, okay? It's something that has been recorded for months, whereas in exposed area we can see that the saturation level of oxygen is much higher. So there is more oxygen in the water related to the wind on the lakes. So that's what I wanted to show you, to give you a quick overview of what we do in terms of research. And I wanted to mention that last slide seems a bit awkward, but you know that the theme of the Congress is about the Water Framework Directive. So I wanted to tell you about what we do regarding this directive. It goes further and beyond the Aquitaine lakes, but you know that we have research actions that are funded by this program. So today IBML exists. It's a program to look at macrophytic level in lakes. So the French macrophyte assessment method for lakes. And it looks at the total degradation of the trophic level of lakes. So we're talking about organic contamination, pollution. We try to look at everything that was done in the research world. There is a lot of articles. There are a lot of articles that come out that are produced from different countries, not only France. It is going beyond our French context. So we have different types of lakes in France. We have a national database that is starting to be quite well furbished. Maybe you know the system. It uses the standardized sampling method, and there are other work that have been talking about the different species. So the research work that I mentioned before. Then we have a multimetric assessment method that allows us to identify and to diagnose disturbances from physical biotopes, thanks to the Albert protocol, and things that are related to invasive species. So early stage diagnosis that can allow us to warn when there is a new invasive species that is being detected in the lake. Now, Franck Benoît is going to take the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Franck Benoît. I work in an organization between cities in charge of water management of the pond watersheds of the southwest shoreline. It is a structure like in Grand-Lieu that does water management, but also the water management and Natura 2000 sites. What I want to look at today is to show you the way we work between the European indicators related to the Water Framework Directive and local initiatives to understand the links with local pressures like water plants and these kind of things. So these are two issues that we have on the area, water quality and natural habitats. First of all, to tell you about the different indicators that we use at the national and European level. So we have monitoring tools for lakes. We have the indicators from the Water Framework Directive, monitored by the Garonne Agency and IRSTA. So we see that these lakes are vulnerable to eutrophication. We have rivers that are dry good half of the year. So these lakes are vulnerable to eutrophication with plenty of phosphorus and nitrogen. I will get back to that later. We have a good chemical status that is highlighted by this monitoring. And we have a monitoring of swimming areas, not from the Water Framework Directive, but it's a different regulation, and we have a very good bacteriological quality, but it is still sensitive to cyanobacterial blooms. It's not as strong as we can see here at the Grand-Lieu lake, but it is something that we still want to look into and to be careful about. So we have different ways of monitoring. We have this indicator system that is rolled out at the lake level. We can look at the quality of phosphorus and nitrogen, but we don't really know where the nutriments come from, where are the pressures exactly. So to try and target that, we work with our colleagues and with Bordeaux University, several laboratories, and with the farmers on our territory to understand the nutrient flux. So every year we look at we monitor the levels of phosphorus and nitrogen, and we could identify that on one lake we didn't have any phosphorus anymore, something that we could see in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But today we have very low levels of phosphorus. And we have a PhD that's in progress with the Bordeaux University to look at the flux, but also to get us a better understanding of the synergies between the water and sediments. For us, it was very important to understand where should we look at in terms of managing the sediments in the lakes. I will tell you about the different management actions that we have carried out. But for us, it was important to look at studies, to have additional studies, because the Water Framework Directive was not enough for us to really come up with managing decisions. And there is something else that is not mentioned, that was not mentioned before. We can see that in the fishes in our lakes we have mercury. It is something that was not monitored before, so we have works that are developed with the University of Bordeaux, with the EPOC and IRSTA at the region level. I'm not going to tell you all about the ongoing work that's happening, but it is good to have this additional research being organized so that we could understand more than what's in the framework of the Water Framework Directive. So, to understand better the flux, we try to work at water treatment plants. So every green dot is a water plant system. Our job was to manage the phosphorus and nitrogen input, and today we have a different system. So we have a wastewater sewer system that is being renewed, and 10 years after the first changes we have good results. Today we no longer have phosphorus in our lakes and our rivers. Second thing, in the northern part of our territory, we have a very wide area of industry, plenty of farming, and we work very closely with our farmers. They are in a territory where they are trying to improve constantly their use of fertilizers, intrants, to decrease rates of this entrance. And for phosphorus, for instance, we've cut by 40% the entrance by really bringing the entrance at the closest level of the plant. But we still have to deal with nitrates that are quite important. And so since last year we've experimented creating buffer areas, buffer wet zones. So we want to keep the water for a while before they are inputted into the rivers and the streams. And that's, for us, it's a plus compared to before. Finally, our streams, whenever they arrive on the lake, they arrive in small deltas. And it is interesting, so we try to look at the different little deltas to make sure that all these waters that arrive, especially when there are floods, are sent to the wetlands. So all the red triangles on the map are places where we have already carried out works, very simple works that can be quite effective. The only downside is that we cannot test the effect. We know what comes in terms of nutrients, but we do not know what comes out, because it's a mix between the stream water and the lake water. So we don't know what comes out of the lake. Then the management of natural lands. So these projects have already been introduced by Vincent. Here I just wanted to show you that we work with two directives, so Water Framework Directive and Habitat Directive. The different indicators that were introduced to you by Vincent are mostly related to the water and so submerged and amphibious areas, but not related to reeds, moors and marshy woodlands. So in that case, we use the Natura 2000 and with the Habitat Directive, knowing that we do not have the level of information related to these indicators. The follow-up of these indicators is not as specific as with the Water Framework Directive. We have identified some pressures related to the water quality with the management of water levels, as Laurent said, and also with the closures of wetlands. We are in a place where farming has completely disappeared. Cattle breeding has completely disappeared. So all these marshy areas is the most important pressure on our habitats in the area. So what do we do on top of this international and national monitoring system? Locally, we try to look at the different species that we have. We also collect, here are a few examples of fauna and flora. If you're in flora, if you're interested, I can tell you more about it. We also have management operations that are carried out, so reopening habitats. We have ecological purging that can take place to try and go back to older practices. A few things to generate discussions. So the Water Framework Directive enables us to have a good level of basic indications, but there are still missing some informations in it. At the territory level, we need to be able to understand where the pressures come from and where are we in terms of input and output at the water level, but also at the sediment level. This is something that we can do at the local level. We have some things that are not included, like the mercury issue that was not involved, that was not part of the Water Framework Directive, and a question related to habitats and species, not only for amphibious species, but species that live around the lakes. And today we are a link between the Water Framework Directive and the Natura 2000. We would like to have an indicators like type of cross-directive indicators. Thank you. So Vincent was 3 minutes longer, so I'm sorry, but we have to stop. Do you have any questions? Are there questions, Luc? About tidal range, I don't know if you were there in Aix. It was organized by ONEMA. The tidal range question is something that comes back quite regularly when we talk about restoring lakes. Have you noticed anything related to macrophytes about natural tidal range? How does it work? We didn't see anything because the tidal range has always been the same for 30 or 40 years. Managers try to look at maintaining activities, so enough water for us to be able to swim in the lake, and sailing activities, for instance, but enough tidal range to match what the level was before all these human activities. So these lakes are not all connected between one another, but some of them are connected. That was done, it's organized, there are dikes, and the idea is to, with the locks, to reproduce the natural tidal level, tidal range. I'd like to add something about the territory I'm in charge of in lowland. The locks I mentioned before are 40 years old, since the 70s. I studied seasonal tidal range, and we can see that there is a homogenization of, it's quite homogeneous, the seasonal tidal range. The impact on biodiversity of the lake was, I hope that Vincent will agree with me, otherwise I'll just have to leave. But we could see that we had bigger biodiversity before the locks than after. So it means that we could conclude with the fact that the seasonal tidal range had an impact on